तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Namaste, my dear friends. This is the second video about Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharishi's subtle teachings, which are very useful for the sadhakas who are advanced in their self inquiry and meditations techniques. So, this is my second video in the same sequence. So, now I will describe how Maharshi has explained how to go for meditation. It is necessary to practice meditation frequently and regularly until the condition induced becomes habitual and permanent throughout the day. Therefore, meditate. You lost sight of the bliss because your meditative attitude had not become natural and because of the recurrence of latent tendencies of the mind. When you become habitual, reflective, the enjoyment of spiritual beatitude becomes a matter of natural experience. It is not by the single realization of I am not the body that the goal of self is reached. Do we become royalty by seeing a king once? One must constantly enter samadhi, absorption in the self, and realize oneself and completely blot out the old tendencies and the mind before one becomes the self. Meditation on the self is our natural state. It is only because we find it hard that we imagine it to be an arbitrary and extraordinary state. We are all unnatural. The mind resting in the self is its natural condition, but instead of that, our minds are resting on outward objects. Meditation helps to remove the illusion that the self must be seen. How do you see the I now? Do you hold a mirror in front of yourself to know your own being? The answer is the I realize that it is the truth. Withdrawing all thoughts from sense objects, one should remain fixed in steady, non objective inquiry. See the self my meditation in this manner. Trace every thought to its origin. Never allow thought to run on. If you do, it will be unending. Take it back to its starting place and the mind will die of inaction. Go back by the question, who am I? No meditation on any kind of object is helpful. In meditating on an object, whether concrete or abstract, you are destroying the sense of oneness and creating duality. Meditate on what you are in reality. Obviously, the seer is more real, true, and important than the seen. Since the seen is dependent on it, so turn your attention to the seer and who is the source of your eye and realize that up to now you have been studying the object, not the subject. Now find out what the word I stand for. All kinds of thoughts arise in meditation. Unless they rise up, how can they be destroyed? They rise up spontaneously in order to be extinguished in due course. The self is realized with a mind that is turned inward. When the mind sees its own source, it becomes that. Next is who am I and whence am I? The thought, who am I, will destroy all other thoughts and finally kill itself also. If other thoughts arise without trying to complete them, one must inquire to whom did this thought arise? What does it matter how many thoughts arise? As each thought arises, one must be watchful and ask to whom is this thought occurring. The answer will be to me. If you inquire who am I, the mind will return to its source. The thought which arose will also submerge. As you practice like this more and more, the power of the mind to remain as its source is increased. As for the necessity of watching the breath before inquiring who am I, all depends on a man's aptitude and his fitness. Those who do not have the mental strength to concentrate and direct it on the quest are advised to watch their breath, since such watching would, as matter of course, bring the mind under control. Who am I will destroy all other thoughts, and like the stick used for stirring the burning fire, it will itself be destroyed in the end. As long as there are impressions of objects in the mind, so long is the inquiry who am I required. As long as there are enemies within the fortress, they will continue to sally forth. But if they are destroyed as they emerge, the fortress will fall into our hands. As a matter of fact, in the quest method, which is more correctly whence am I and not merely who am I, we are trying to find whence the I thought, the ego, the mind arise within us. The method contains within itself, though implicitly, the watching of breath. When we watch the root of thoughts, we are necessarily watching the source of breath also, as the I thought and breath arise from the same source. To inquire who am I is really trying to find out the source of the I thought. You are not to think of other thoughts such as I am not the body, etc. Seeking the source of I thought serves as a means of getting rid of all other thoughts. Who is born? It is only he who asks, whence am I born? That is truly born in Brahma, the prime source. He indeed is born eternally. He is the Lord of saints. He is the ever new. We should not give scope for other thoughts but keep attention fixed on the I thought. This is done by asking to whom the thought arises, and if the answer is I, get rid of the thought by asking the question who is this I and whence its source. The meditation or mantra Soham, I am that, is not the same as who am I. They are different. Why should we go on repeating Soham or affirming I am that? One must find the real I within, tracing within the source of I. We see it. The apparent sense of I has no separate existence but merges in the real I. Who am I is not to be used as a mantra. If means you must find out where in you arises the I thought, which is the source of all other thoughts. Perception, memory, or any other experience only comes to the I. You don't have these experiences during sleep, and yet you existed during sleep, and you exist now too. That shows the I continues while other things come and go. Who am I means you must concentrate and see where the I thought arises. Instead of looking outward, look inward and see where the I thought arises. Never mind whether there are visions or sounds or anything else, or whether there is a void. Are you present during all this or are you not? You must have been there even during the void to be able to say you experienced the void. To be found in that you, the quest for the I from start to finish. Whatever other methods may be chosen, there will always be the doer that cannot be escaped. Just who is that doer is what must be found out. Until then, the sadhana practice cannot be ended. So eventually, all must come to find out who am I. You complain that there is nothing preliminary or positive to start with. You have the I to start with. Suggestive replies to the inquiry such as Shivoham, I am Shiva, are not to be given to the mind during this meditation. The true answer will come by itself. Any answer which the ego might have cannot be correct. Any answer which the ego might give cannot be correct. These affirmations or auto-suggestions may be of help to those who follow other methods, but not in this method of inquiry. The inquiry to know the self is different from the method of Sivoham or Soham. I am he. I rather lay stress upon self knowledge, for you are first concerned with yourself before you proceed to know the world and its Lord. The Soham meditation of I am Brahma meditation is more or less a mental thought, but the quest I speak of is a direct method and indeed superior to other meditations. For the moment you get into a moment of quest for the self and get deeper and deeper, the real self is waiting to take you in. Then whatever is done by something else and you have no hand in it. You gain you gain steadiness in practice only through more practice. Next is I. Whence does the I arise? Seek this within the I, then vanishes. This is the pursuit of wisdom. Where the I vanishes, these there appeared an I by itself. This is the infinite. Though it reveals itself thus, it is not the ego I, but the perfect being, the self absolute, where the I vanished and merged in its source. There appears spontaneously and continuously an I. This is the heart, the infinite supreme being. On driving deep upon the quest, who am I and from whence? Thoughts disappear and consciousness of self then flashes forth as the I within the cavity of every seeker's heart. The I consciousness is the absolute, though it comes before Sahaja, the permanent and highest level of experiencing the self. There is in it, as in Sahaja itself, the subtle intellect. The difference being that in the latter, the sense of forms disappear, which is not the case in the former, making the corpse body remain as a corpse and not even uttering the word I. One should inquire keenly thus: now, what is that rises as I? Then there would shine in the heart a kind of wordless illumination of the form I. That is, there would shine of its own accord the pure consciousness, which is unlimited and one. The limited and many thoughts have disappeared. If one remains quiescent without abandoning that experience, the egoity, the individual sense of the form I am the body will be totally destroyed, and at the end of final thoughts, the I form also will be quenched like the fire that burns camphor. The great sages and scriptures declare that this alone is release. It is the divine self that shines in the heart as I. When the mind turns inward seeking who am I and merges in the heart, then the I hangs down this head in shame and the one I appears as itself. Rejoice eternally. The heart rejoices at the feet of the Lord, who is the self, shining within as I eternally, so that there is no alternation of night and day. This will result in removal of ignorance of the self. The realization of I is indeed the self which is experienced as I shining of its own accord, the absolute being the witness of the three states of waking, dream, and the deep sleep, distinct from the five seats, aware of the mental modes in the waking and dream states, and of their absence in state of deep sleep. Problems and their solutions. You may experience you may experience anything, but you must never rest content with that. Whether you experience pleasure or pain, ask yourself the question who feels the pleasure and carry on the practice sadhana until pleasure and pain are transcended till reality alone remains. So long as these thoughts of activity are there, sleep will also be there. Thoughts and sleep are counterparts of the same thing. We should not sleep too much or go without it altogether, but sleep only moderately. To prevent too much sleep, we must try and have no thoughts. As an aid in overcoming the tendency to sleep or go unconscious during meditation, eat only sattvic, pure, not spicy or highly seasoned food, and that too in moderate measure, and not indulge in too much physical activity. Sleep is the first obstacle. The second is the sense objects of the world which divert one's attention. The third is the thoughts in the mind about previous experiences with sense objects. The fourth is bliss. In that state, the thought I am the enjoyer is still present. The final state of samadhi is to be reached in which one is the bliss or one with reality. The more you get fixed in the self, the more the thoughts will drop off themselves. Regulation of life, such as getting up at a fixed hour, bathing, doing mantra, japa repetition, observing ritual, all this is for people who do not feel drawn to self-inquiry or are not capable of it. But for those who can practice this method, all rules and disciplines are unnecessary. Success in turning the mind inward is achieved by practice, self inquiry, and dispassion, and it succeeds only gradually. Do not regret tamas, inertia, sluggishness, but when sattva, purity, harmony comes into play, hold on to it and make the best of it. The thought I am not able to concentrate is itself an obstacle. Why should the thought arise? There is consciousness along with quietness in the mind. This is exactly the state to be aimed at. The word diving is only appropriate if one has to turn the mind within in order to avoid being distracted by the ongoing tendencies of the mind. But when deep quietness prevails without obstructing the consciousness, where is the need to dive? Practice. Next is practice. Effort is necessary up to the stage of realization. Even then, the self should be spontaneously become evident. Otherwise, happiness will not be complete up to the state of spontaneity. There must be effort in some form or other. Divine grace is essential for realization, but grace is vouchsafed only to him who is a true devotee or a yogi, one working to gain union of the mind and self. It is given only to those who have striven hard and ceaselessly on the path of freedom. There is a state beyond effort and effortlessness. However, until it realized effort is necessary, that which is in peace, all that we need to do is to keep quiet. Peace is our real nature. We spoil it. What is required is that we cease to spoil it. Grace is always there, but practice is also necessary. Staying in the self by one's efforts with self inquiry is like training a roguish bull to remain confined to his stall by tempting him with luscious grass and preventing him from straying. It is necessary both for you to strive and for the Guru to help. The Guru's grace is indispensable, but so is one's own effort in putting into practice the instructions given by the Guru. Efforts must be made in the waking state and alert consciousness and self-realized here and now. Effortlessness and choiceless awareness is one real nature. If we can attain that state and abide in it, it is all right. But one cannot reach it without effort. The effort of deliberate meditation. Of course, every master and every book tells the aspirant to keep quiet, but it is not easy to do so. That's why all this effort is necessary. Even if we find somebody who have achieved the supreme state of stillness, you may take it that the necessary effort had already been made in a previous life. See what helped you to keep out thoughts and adopt that for meditation. Your effort is meant not allow yourself to be distracted by other thoughts than your meditation. Practices are needed as long as one has not realized they are for putting an end to obstacles to abiding in the self. As soon as they come here, some want to immediately be self realized being. They ignore the effort involved or required. Is there a shortcut to liberation? Is it something to be purchased in a shop? What is important is steadfast resolve. It does not make much difference if you concentrate on the top of the nose, the center of the eyebrow, or sound of the mantra, and so on. The really important thing is to pay attention to the source or perception or mantra, to the eye that hears the mantra or perceives the objects of concentration. Keep your attention fixed on that. Perseverance alone counts. The more you meditate, the easier it becomes to meditate, till at last it becomes natural. Practice is necessary. When there is grace, your repeated effort is bound to erase tendencies. Leave God's job to God. You have to do what is in your hands. When the time is ripe, God's grace, which is always operating, will be felt. The mistake one is prone to make is to abandon effort under the mistaken impression that God's grace is absent. One should not slacken, for God's grace is bound to operate in due time when you are ripe. Next is Satsanga. If one gains association with sadhus, of what use are all the religious observances? When the excellent cool southern breeze itself is blowing, what is the use of holding a hand fan? Sacred bathing places that are composed of water and images and deities which are made of stone and earth cannot be comparable to those great souls. Oh, what a wonder! The bathing places and deities bestow purity of mind after countless days, whereas such purity is instantly bestowed upon people as soon as sadhus see them with their eyes. Heat will be removed by the cool moon, poverty by the celestial wish fulfilling tree, and sin by the Ganges. But know that all these, beginning with heat, will be removed merely by having darshan, sight of incomparable sadhus. The supreme state which is praised and which is attained here in this life by clear self-inquiry, which arises in the heart when association with a sadhu is gained, is impossible to attain by listening to preachers, by studying and learning the meaning of the scriptures, by virtuous deeds, or by any other means. By satsanga, the association with the objects of the world will be removed. When that worldly association is removed, the attachment or tendencies of the mind will be destroyed. Those who are devoid of mental attachment will perish in that which is motionless. Thus, they attain liberation. Cherish their association. Satsanga really means association with the unmanifest Sat or reality. But as very few can do that, they have to do the second best, which is association with the manifest truth, Sat. That is the Guru. One who knows or has realized the truth is also regarded as a truth. Satsanga will make the mind sink into the heart. Such association is both mental and physical. The extremely visible beings of the group pushes the mind inward. He is also in the heart of the seeker, and so he draws the latter's inward bent mind into the heart. Association with the sages should be made because thoughts are so persistent. The sage has already overcome the mind and remains in peace. Being in his proximity helps to bring about this condition in otherwise there is guru. The marks of a guru are steady abidance in the self, looking at all with an equal eye, unshakable courage at all times, in all places and circumstances. He is proper Guru to whom your mind is attuned. He should be endowed with tranquility, patience, forgiveness, and other virtues. He should be capable of attracting others even with his eyes, just as a magnet attracts iron. He should have a feeling of equality towards all. He who has these virtues is a true Guru. Choose that one where you get peace. If you wish to know what is the nature or real form Swarupa of a Guru, you must now know your own nature or real form first. How can one know the nature of the Guru if one does not know one's own real nature? If you want to know the real nature of the Guru, you must find out, learn to look upon the whole world as the Guru's form. One must see Guru in all living beings. The Guru is the bestower of silence who reveals the light of self-knowledge, which shines as the residual reality. Spoken words are of no use whatsoever if the eyes of the Guru meet the eyes of the disciple. Contact with the Guru is necessary. It is like the elephant which wakes up on seeing a lion in its dream. Even as an elephant wakes up at the mere sight of the lion, so too it is certain that the disciple wakes up from the deep sleep of ignorance into wakefulness of true knowledge through the Guru's benevolent look of grace. Work within. The Guru is both within and without, so he creates conditions to drive you inwards and prepare the interior to drag you to the center. Thus, he gives you a push from outside and exerts a pull from within, so that you will be fixed at the center. In sleep, you are centered within. On waking, your mind rushes out simultaneously thinking this, that, and the other. This must be checked. It is possible only for the agent who can work both within and without. Can he be identified with a body? Because you think you are a body, you think the Guru also is a body and that he will be something tangible to you. However, his work lies within in the spiritual realm. He who instructs an ardent seeker to do this or that is not a true guru. The seeker is already afflicted by his activities and wants peace and rest. In other words, he wants cessation of his activities. If a teacher tells him to do something in addition to or in place of his other activities, can that be a help to the seeker? Activity is creation. Activity is the destruction of one's inherent happiness. If activity is advocated, the advisor is not a guru but a killer. In such circumstances, either the creator Brahma or death Yama may be said to have come in the guise of a master. Such a person cannot liberate the aspirant, he can only strengthen his fetters. The Guru is both external and internal. From the exterior, he gives a push to the mind to turn it inwards. From the interior, he pulls the mind towards the self and helps in guiding the mind. This is Guru's grace. There is no difference between God, Guru, and the self. God, who is immanent in His grace, takes pity on the loving devotee and manifests Himself according to the devotee's development. The devotee thinks that he is a man and expects a relationship between two physical bodies. But the Guru, who is God incarnate, works from within, helps the man to see the error of his ways and guides him on the right path until he realizes the self within. The Guru is absolutely necessary. The Upanishads say that no one but a Guru can take a man out of the jungle of mind, intellect, and sense perceptions. A realized one sends out waves of spiritual influence which draw many people towards him. Yet he may sit in a cave and maintain complete silence. We may listen to lectures upon truth and come away with hardly any grasp of the subject. But to come into contact with a realized one, though he speaks nothing, will give much more grasp of the subject. He never needs to go out among the public. If necessary, he can use other as instruments. The Guru does not bring about self-realization. He simply removes the obstacles to it. The Guru is always within you. If the disciple finds the Guru internally, then it does not matter where he goes. Staying here or elsewhere must be understood to be the same and to have the same effect. The Guru will go with the disciple in his own path and then gradually turn him into the supreme path at the ripe moment. Suppose the car is going at top speed, to stop it at once or turn it at once would be attended by disastrous consequences. The Guru, not being a physical form, his Contact will continue even after his physical form vanishes. If one enlightened sage exists in the world, his influence will be felt or benefit all people and not simply his immediate disciples. Conquering 1,000 elephants is nothing beside the Guru's power to conquer the rutting elephant of the ego. It is necessary for you to strive and natural for the Guru's help to annihilate recurrent tendencies and bring to being knowledge free from dread, delusion, and desire. Know that the mantra true is but devotion to the Guru's feet. Who meditates on Guru's feet, the flawless flame of pure awareness gains from grace supreme the gift of pure awareness, clarity of mind, and that ends all sorrow. If you are working with your available light, you will meet your Guru as he will be seeking you himself. The Guru is none other than the self. This is the most important point, most important point. The human hour says that God, the Self, is the Guru appearing as a man to dispel the ignorance of man, just as a tame deer is used as a decoy to capture a wild deer. He has to appear in a body in order to dispel the I am the body notion of the seeker. If the Guru is silent, the seeker's mind gets purified itself. I have not said that a Guru is not necessary, but a Guru need not always be in human form. First, a person thinks that he is an inferior, and then there is a superior, all knowing, all powerful God who controls his own and the world's destiny. So he worships him or does devotion to him. When he reaches a certain stage and becomes fit for enlightenment, the same Guru whom he was worshipping comes as a Guru and leads him on. That Guru comes only to tell him that God is within yourself. Dive within and realize God, Guru, and the self are the same. R- Ripened by the matchless power of self-awareness, now the Guru stands as a transcendent being supreme. He who penance done he who penance done become the target of his glance of grace, gains greatness that surpasses speech. Next very important term is grace. Grace is there all along. Grace is the self. It is not something to be acquired. All that is necessary is to know its existence. In the same way, the sun is pure brightness. It is ever there and shines, and you are surrounded by sunlight. Still, if you want to know the sun, you must turn your eyes in its direction and look at it. Similarly, grace is only to be found by effort, although it is here and now. We cannot attain realization of the self by our mind unaided by God's grace. One's ignorance of the self revealing immediately of divine grace is not proof of its absence. If the owl does not see the sun that illumines the whole world, is that the fault of the sun? Is it not due to ignorance of the bird or the defectiveness of its sight? Your very desire for grace is due to the grace that is already working in you. As for grace, it is ever within you. You are never out of its operation. Grace is always there. In full enjoyment of silent bliss, the gift of grace that flows from wisdom's Lord, the Lord of Self, the Jiva's Nirvana is casting off the fivefold sheath attachment to the body. Grace is always present. You are neck deep in water and yet cry for water. This passion cannot be acquired, nor realization of truth, nor inherence in the self. In the absence of the Guru's grace, but practice is necessary. Grace is in the beginning, middle, and the end. God, grace, and Guru are all synonymous and also eternal and immanent. The highest form of grace is silence. It is also the highest instruction, Upadesa. Though through divine grace one can go beyond the influences of past actions. Individually, we are incapable because our mind is weak. Grace is necessary. Sadhu Seva, serving a holy being, one whose life is totally dedicated to God, will bring it about. To me, there is no distinction. Grace is flowing like the ocean, ever full. Everyone draws from it according to his capacity. How can one who brings only a tumbler complain that he is not able to take as much as another who has bought a jar? It is only by God's grace that you think of God. Why do you cry that there is no mercy from the Lord that is there to sob about? Instead of being poised in the self, why do you go on wailing? What is this talk of Guru's grace? Does the Guru hold you by the hand and whisper something in your ear? You imagine him to be what you are yourself because you are identified with the body. You think that he is also a body and will do something tangible to you. But his work lies within. How is Guru found? If a devotee prays to God unselfishly, God, who is immanent in His grace, takes pity on the loving devotee and manifests Himself as a being according to the devotee's standard. The devotee thinks that he is a person and expect a relationship between them as a body, but the Guru, who is God or self-incarnate, works from within, helps the person to see the error of his ways and guides him along the right path until he realizes the self within. After such a realization, he feels, I was so worried before, I am after all the self, the same as before, but not affected by anything. Where is he now who was so miserable? He is nowhere to be found. What should we do now? Only live up to the words of the Master. If towards the Lord you take one single step, then with much more than a mother's love, He takes 9 steps towards you to accept you. Such is the Guru's grace. Next comes the surrender. There are two ways of achieving surrender. One is looking into the source of the I and merging into that source. The other is feeling I am helpless myself. God alone is all powerful. And except my throwing myself completely on Him, there is no other means of safety for me. And thus gradually developing the conviction that God alone exists and the ego does not count. Both methods lead to the same goal. Complete surrender is another name for jnana or liberation. Surrender appears easy because people imagine that once they say with their lips, I surrender, that they can be free to do whatever they like. But the fact is, you can have no likes or dislikes after you surrender. You will, your will become completely non existent with the Lord's will taking its place. Surrender is complete only when you reach the state thou art all and thy will be done. Thy will be done. You will know in due course that your glory lies where you cease to exist. In order to gain that state you should surrender yourself. Then the master sees that you are in a fit state of receive guidance. He guides you. The master is within and without. He gives a push from without and exerts a pull from within, so that you may be fixed at the center. Leave it all to the master. Surrender to him without reserve. All this task of surrender is like pinching a jaggery, refined brown sugar image of Lord Ganesha and presenting it as a sweets offering to the same Lord. You say you offer your body, soul, and possessions to God. Were they yours to begin with, that you could offer them? You are perfect and complete, so abandon the idea of incompleteness. There is nothing to be destroyed. Ahankaras, the individual I, is not a real thing. It is the mind that makes the effort, and mind is not real. Just as it is not necessary to kill a rope that one imagines to be a snake, so also there is no need to kill the mind. Knowing the form of the mind makes the mind disappear. That which is forever non existent is already removed. If you have surrendered, you must be able to abide by the will of God and not make a grievance of what may not please you. Things may turn out differently from what you wish or what they look apparently. What is destiny? There is no destiny. Surrender and all will be well. Throw the responsibility on God. Do not bear the burden yourself. What can destiny do to you then? During worldly activity, if your attention is fixed on the fundamental reality, there is no difficulty. But ordinary people forget the reality and take the same alone to be real. The different eyes are not real. There is only one eye. The separate eye is like a watchman in the fort. He is like the protector of the body. The real owner is everybody is only the one real I. So when the separate I surrenders to the real I, then I and mine are eliminated. The true state comes into existence when, after sorting out what belongs to whom, the ego I surrenders itself to the real owner. And the grace of God is obtained practically by self surrender. If you have surrendered but still doubt God's grace, where does the fault lie? Grace is constant. Your judgment is variable. Surrender will make one understand His grace. You say you have surrendered but still do not feel the grace of God. Sincerity is wanting. Surrender should not be verbal or conditional. Surrender unreservedly, and the higher power will reveal itself. The disciple surrender to his master. That means there is no wasting of vestige of individuality retained in the disciple. If surrender is complete, all sense of individuality is lost. There is no cause for misery. The eternal being is only happiness, and that is revealed. You ask if you ask if grace cannot hasten complete competence for the search. Leave it to God. Surrender to Him unreservedly. He never forsakes the one who has surrendered. One of two things must be done. Either surrender because you admit your inability and require the higher power to help you, or investigate the cause of misery, go into the source and merge in the self. Either way, you will be free from misery. The ego submits only when it recognizes the higher power. Such a recognition is surrender or submission. Otherwise, ego remains stuck up like an image carved out on a temple tower, making a pretense by its trained look and posture that is supporting the tower on its shoulders. The ego cannot exist without the power but thinks that it acts of its own accord. Surrender to God and await His pleasure. If you ask Him to do as you please, it is not surrender but demand of it. You cannot have Him obey you and yet think you have surrendered. He knows that is the best and when and how to do. Leave everything entirely to Him. His is the burden. You have no longer any cares. All your cares are for Him. Such is surrender. Surrender can take effect when done with full knowledge. Such knowledge comes after inquiry. It ends in surrender. If one has surrendered himself to God or Guru, the power to which he has surrendered will take him on the right course. One need no longer concern himself about the course. The doubt will arise only if he fails to obey the Master in all details. Surrender consists in giving up oneself and one's possessions to the Lord of mercy. Then what is left over for the man? Nothing. Neither himself nor his possession. The body is liable to be born and to die, but having made over to the Lord, mind needs no longer worry about it. Birth and death cannot strike terror. For where is the identity of the individual to be frightened? It is true that the divine will prevails at all times under all circumstances. The individuals cannot act on their own accord. Recognize the force of divine will and keep quiet. Surrender itself is a mighty prayer. If you believe that God will do all the things that you want Him to do, then surrender yourself to Him. Otherwise, let God alone and know yourself. Whose fault is it if the traveler, instead of putting his luggage in the conveyance which bears his load anyway, carries it on his head or in his lap to his own inconvenience? If full responsibility is thrown on the higher power, things will go on of their own accord. We walk on this ground. While doing so, do we usually consider each step as to whether we should raise one leg after the other or stop at some stage? Is not walking done automatically? The same is the case of inhaling and exhaling. No special effort is made to inhale or exhale. The case is the same with life also. Quite a number of things are done automatically without our being conscious of it. If actions of the mind, speech, and body are merged with God, all the burdens of life are on Him. When one has completely surrendered oneself at the feet of Shiva, thereby becoming the nature of the self, the resulting abundant peace in which there is not the least room within the heart for one to make any complaint alone is the nature of supreme devotion. If one surrenders completely, there will be no one left to ask questions or to be considered. Either the thoughts are eliminated by holding on to the root thought I, or one surrenders unconditionally to the higher power. There are the only two ways to realization. Self-inquiry dissolves the ego by looking for it and finding it to be non-existent, whereas devotion surrenders it. Therefore, both comes to the same ego-free goal, which is all that is required. True surrender is the melting of the ego in its source, the heart. God is not deceived by outward acts. What he sees in the worshipper is how much of the ego remains in full control and how much is on the verge of destruction. It, it is legitimate to pray as long as you feel that you are different from the higher power. But better still, attain the state of self surrender and entrust your entire burden to the Lord, who will then take the burden off your back and give you the feeling that you are in Him and are one with Him. If your surrender is total and complete, you need not ask anything. Try to get rid of the thought I and mine. Don't feel anything is yours, it is all God's. So thank you my dear friends for watching and listening this video. Thank you so much. Please like, comment and share the video and subscribe my channel. Thank you. Thank you. Namaskar.